Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board and the Nebraska Corn Board.
Growing more with less is the mantra of Nebraska's corn farmers, and they're using incredible technology to do it. Soil moisture monitors let them know when their crop needs water and how much. GPS systems eliminate overlaps in the field, saving fuel and money. New hybrids reduce the use of pesticides and increase yields. When you're talking new technology and innovation, Nebraska corn farmers are all ears. Nebraska's family corn farmers, sustaining innovation.
Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board and the Nebraska Corn Board.
Welcome to this week's edition of Market Journal. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. On this episode, Roy Smith looks at corn and soybean markets. Dave Aiken explains 3 legislative bills dealing with livestock expansion in Nebraska. Aaron Berger talks about developing a marketing plan for calves. And Loren Giesler discusses the purpose of new soybean seed treatments. Roy Smith is our grain market analyst this week. There was a big shift for Nebraska in this week's U.S. Drought Monitor from UNL. For the last 5 weeks, the state had held steady with 3/4 in no drought category and about a quarter listed as D0 or abnormally dry. But Thursday's release moved a large portion, enough to leave only 37% in D0. The 2% now listed as moderate or D1 in drought severity is the most since August, and the 62% in D0 to D4 classification is the most since July. Later on in the show, Nebraska Extension State climatologist Al Dutcher will take a look at current situations across the state. Corn and soybean markets finished poorly Monday and Tuesday, but put in a positive day when we talked with Roy Wednesday afternoon.
Well, the markets the last week or so, actually since about the 1st of March, have really been depressed. I hate to say things like that, but we had an incident there with the Brazilian trucker strike that really was a catalyst for causing some pretty strong corn and soybean markets, soybeans especially in February, and about the time we thought that the market had a head of steam, why the trucker strike was solved, and we've been pretty much down every day since then, except for Wednesday of this last week we had a good day, and so hopefully maybe that'll turn the market around.
Fundamentally, does everything remain the same?
Nothing really has changed fundamentally. We know that Brazil's got a crop in the field or being harvested, and that's going to come to town. I guess the thing that really concerns me, 2 weeks ago I was at Commodity Classic in Phoenix, and boy, you take a poll of farmers at a meeting like that, and there's an awful lot of corn that's in the bin and not priced. And you know, I guess you have to pick your time when you're going to sell something like that, but it could get hard to do there if we don't get some of that moving right soon.
Was one of those farmers Roy Smith?
It might have been, yeah. I've pretty much got rid of all my soybeans, but corn's still in the bin in good condition, and we just haven't had much of spectacular go on in the corn market. In the soybean market, we had one of the best dead cat bounce moves in history, and right on time for everybody that watches that. They had a chance to get some beans moved on some very attractive prices, but corn's kind of been dead in the water. But now we've got new crop futures with a little bit of optimism, and hopefully we can turn that into some profit down the road.
What's the game plan for those farmers that still have that corn?
I think you look at a day like last Wednesday when the corn was up 3 or 4 cents, soybeans up a dime, and we had a couple days like that the previous week, and put some orders in with your grain merchandiser so you don't have to watch it, and set them wherever you think is reasonable, at 10 cents, 15 cents, 20 cents above the market, and put a time delay on them so that if we don't get there, you get it sold. But the thing that we really want to stay away from is that's holding this old crop corn into the next fall, unless you're willing to hedge it. If you're willing to hedge it, you can hedge in some storage profit, but it's not a spectacular deal. It's just a few dollars.
When we talk with you, a lot of times we talk about the historical trends of prices. Are those still following along, or have they now broken?
Up until this last big move in the market, those trends have really held together well. You know, I track my long-term seasonal trends from the 1st of May to April 30th of the year before, and from the 1st of May until about 2 weeks ago, they just fit the pattern almost perfectly. And you know, I have a little spec account that I use to try out my strategies, and it has done very well since last spring up until just this last week. And so don't give up on the seasonal price trends yet. If you look at those long-term charts, you see beginning in the winter, you see a gradual upslope going higher, and usually basis improvement as well. I'm not sure this year we're going to get that basis improvement, but hopefully we can at least get back to that gradual uptrend that we normally see.
How do you approach the reports on March 31st on prospective plantings and grain stocks?
Actually, without much interest, to be honest with you. You know, we've already got some guesses built into the thing. The last report we had was a little friendly for soybeans, and maybe a little less friendly for corn, but the corn already had some positive fundamentals built into it. So, you know, right now, or end of March, or whatever timeline you want to use, the weather from now until planting time, the attitude of the farmers between now and planting time really has no effect on what the harvest turns out to be. In fact, before you came here today, I was just looking at some of the data that showed that about a 40% probability that the market's going to do what we think it's going to do, and about 60% probability it's going to do something else. So you need to be real careful. You know, I still flash back to place your bets based on cash flow, because cash flow is what keeps us going.
Next week, Mike Briggs will join us to look at cattle markets. There are 3 legislative bills in the Nebraska Unicameral dealing with livestock expansion: LB 106, LB 175, and LB 176. For perspective, Nebraska ranks 1st in commercial cattle slaughter, 7th in commercial hog slaughter, and 26th in milk production. However, it should be noted these numbers only account for the finished product. For example, a pig or cow grown in another state could be slaughtered in Nebraska, adding to this state's total. If all 3 bills before the legislature were to pass, Nebraska Extension Water and Ag Law Specialist Dave Aiken believes the effects would be significant to the future of ag in this state. We talked with Dave Wednesday afternoon to hear about each proposal.
Well, LB 106 deals with livestock facility zoning. LB 175 deals with state infrastructure grants for livestock-friendly counties and tax breaks for new livestock developments, and LB 176 authorizes custom hog feeding contracts with packers.
Covering a lot of ground here. Let's start with livestock zoning, LB 106. Explain it to me.
Well, under current law, counties can pretty much set up zoning regulations for livestock facilities any way they want to with no state oversight. This would change dramatically under LB 106. The Department of Ag would set up a zoning evaluation matrix that would set up the requirements that new livestock facilities would have to meet. If they met the requirements, they would basically, be entitled to their permit.
How big of a change would that be from what's currently in place in this state?
It's a monumental change. It really goes from a system of local control to one where there is effectively state control over those zoning decisions. And it would make our laws look a lot more like the laws they have in Iowa, a lot more livestock friendly. The big setbacks that some counties have would be taken off the books, and it would be a very different situation.
How controversial is it?
Well, it's pretty controversial. It's supported by the Farm Bureau, the cattlemen, Dairy Association, pork producers, and the Association of County Officials. That's very important politically. I think that's enough to tip the balance. It's opposed by the Farmers Union, Center for Rural Affairs, independent cattlemen, and then 3 rural counties were against it.
All right, let's move on to the next one. It's LB 175. What would this bill do?
Well, it's 2 things. It would provide grants to counties that have been designated by the Department of Ag as being livestock friendly to help with bridges and roads associated with increased livestock production. And then it also increased tax breaks, the amount of tax breaks available to livestock operations from a maximum of $30,000 to a new maximum of $150,000, which means $1.5 million new facility will qualify for the tax breaks.
Where does the support and opposition for this one land?
Very similar to the other bills, supported by the Farm Bureau, the cattlemen, and the county officials, and is opposed by the Sierra Club, Farmers Union, and the Grain and Feed Association.
All right, let's talk about the final one. It's LB 176. What would that proposal do?
Well, it would authorize custom feeding of swine, allow that between livestock producers in Nebraska and packers. And supporters say that this would give new producers a chance to get into the business. Opponents say that it would give packers too much control over the hog market in Nebraska.
And who's in favor, who's not in favor of this one?
Very similar, supported by the Pork Producers, Department of Ag, and the Farm Bureau, opposed by the independent cattlemen, the Grange, Center for Rural Affairs, Farmers Union, and the Sierra Club.
What do you think is going to happen with these 3 bills, Dave?
I think, well, they're all 3 priority bills, so they're all going to get discussed, but I think that they are probably going to be adopted.
And how big of a change would this be across the state?
This would be a sea change. This would remove most of the county zoning obstacles to expanded livestock production in Nebraska. And of course, this is what many ag groups and livestock groups have wanted for a long time. And so, if a proposal would meet these basically state requirements in terms of the setbacks, the odor requirements and stuff like that, then the counties would be much more difficult for counties to turn them down. And if they did get turned down, they could still go to court and probably get that turned down overruled.
And the tax breaks?
Well, that would also help. More of the money could go to these larger type facilities, and so that we could see some changes with that as well.
Overall, the 3 of them, as big of a change as we've seen if they do pass since?
Well, to me, this would be the biggest change since Initiative 300 was adopted, and then again when Initiative 300 was overruled in court. But it's that kind of a change. I mean, it is a huge change and very important to the future of ag in Nebraska.
Initiative 300 dealt with corporate farming in Nebraska. For LB 106, Dave says the zoning would not account for land very near to towns or cities. Depending on the population, communities would still be able to ban livestock facilities within a 1 to 3 mile radius outside of city limits. Next week, Dave will join us again to take a closer look at the custom hog feeding bill. Not that long ago, we analyzed the great profits seen by livestock producers. 2014 was the best year ever for hog producers. Those in the cattle industry were looking at tax options after strong margins. But those 2 markets entered a different world in 2015. At the Goodmanson Ranch in August, we talked with Nebraska Extension educator Berger about marketing the 2014 calf crop, one that could have set records. We met with Aaron this week to talk about developing a marketing plan for this year. We also discussed the dangers of grass tetany as producers approach the grazing season. Our interview took place on UNO's campus, where Nebraska Extension was holding a 2-day conference. We began by talking about the current market environment for this year's calves.
Yeah, so we've certainly seen a change from where we were prior to Christmas, and seen a significant drop both in fat cattle and feeder cattle. Both of those have come back some, and I think really thinking about from a cow-calf standpoint, if you sold your calves this fall, you got prices that you never dreamed you would get before. And so I think it's important to think about marketing these calves that are being born now and having a plan in place and thinking about what are you going to do to try to take advantage of where prices are looking forward to the spring, summer, and into the fall. And so thinking about your options, whether that's looking at a forward contract with somebody, looking at futures and options as a potential, something like livestock risk protection insurance, evaluating your options and then putting that in writing, committing yourself to that, and hopefully providing some protection on the downside in this market scenario.
For farmers and ranchers that aren't maybe used to those types of tools, are they difficult to use, and how able are they to quickly learn them?
Yeah, so I think it really depends on what you're comfortable with too, and it also depends on your personality. something like a futures or options, you really probably better find a broker who understands that, and you can communicate to them your goals, what you want to do. They can tell you what would work for you. Something like a livestock risk protection insurance, a little bit of education there really can help you do that. That's basically like an insurance policy. You can set the floor but leave the upside open. That's something you really can do on your own. Again, working with a insurance agent who sells the product, but you need to be an informed consumer as you think about using that tool.
As you determine your break-even costs, what are some things that go into determining what's going to actually cost you to produce that calf?
Yeah, so we finished 2014, and so you know your costs for 2014 already, hopefully. You can put those in the books, go back and look at those, then look at where you're at in terms of your projections for this year. Our harvested feed costs have certainly come down. Things like pasture rates have gone up. And so just going through that, understanding where you're at in terms of costs. Inputs from a fuel standpoint have gone down. Maybe you've made some equipment purchases or things like that, that might go up. But that really helps us looking back to know where we're going to be for this future year.
Is there a difference in calves? Is there going to be more value this year towards the heifer as people think about rebuilding, or try to at least?
Yeah, I really think we're going to see what happens, but I think the spread between heifers and steers is going to be tighter than oftentimes it is, just because where we're at in this cattle cycle and the desire to rebuild the cow herd. And so if you can package heifers into an attractive group that's bangs vaccinated, ready to breed, even into next fall, I think there's going to be a real good demand for those kind of females to go back into production.
Is there anything you can do to add value if you are going to keep them back? You're not going to sell them, you're just going to keep them on your operation?
Yeah, I think if you're thinking about backgrounding, I think you want to think about these process verified programs that can somehow differentiate yourself from just a commodity type environment. If you can think about maybe where you can partner with someone else, whether a feed yard or someone like that, because we're in a short supply, there's people looking for opportunities to make those connections and maybe capture some additional value there.
As you look towards the grazing season in your area of Scottsbluff, what do the grasses look like out there?
We got good subsoil moisture, but the recent change into warmer temperatures and dry already has some grass fires, and so the top's going to dry out. We definitely need some moisture here in the next 2 months. March, April are really critical for us for our cool season grasses, and so we have time yet, but we're sure keeping our eye on what's happening here.
Why is grass tetany something we should be worried about as we approach grazing season?
Yeah, so at this time of the year, we're thinking about the warm weather we've had. Grasses are starting to green up. And grass tetany is really something that impacts primarily lactating cows the most. And so if we can do some things now from a preparation standpoint, if we're going to be grazing cool season grasses or cool season annuals like wheat or rye, feeding a high mag mineral now, making sure those cows are balanced in that prior to that, using that feed can really help us reduce the incidence of grass tetany. So it's really true that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure in that kind of scenario.
Are there things that people can look for to see if there are signs of it?
So really it's a forage issue, thinking about what's in the forage. High potassium combined with low calcium and then shortage of magnesium is what triggers this event. And it really can vary also on weather. And so cool, cloudy conditions seem to trigger that. Real high protein in the forage. So if you think about real lush, immature forage, that helps trigger that type of event. So by preparing ahead of time these animals, basically having them in a state prior to and when they're grazing on a high mag mineral, probably the best thing we can do to prevent that from happening.
How does it affect the animal?
So when it affects the animals, basically it's happening at a cell level where they have a shortage of calcium and a shortage of magnesium. Animal will convulse or have tremors, act staggering, and then it results in the animal shutting down if you're not treating it quickly.
On the Market Journal homepage, we'll link to more information on developing a marketing plan and the dangers of grass tetany. The March Nebraska farmer says Jason Arns of Crofton is pleased with his new 600-head pork facility, especially the manure management system he set up. Arns explains the system called Pond Lift in this month's issue. The aeration equipment converts manure storage sites into aerobic treatment facilities, reducing all solids to liquid form. Arns says the system not only helps him better manage storage requirements, but it also greatly reduces odors and allows him to apply nutrients to crops through his center pivot during the growing season. You can read more about the system in the March Nebraska Farmer. Nebraska Extension estimates the state's soybean growers lost about $30 million in 2014 because of soybean cyst nematode. SCN has been confirmed in 57 Nebraska counties and is the most yield-impacting pest in the state. For future planting seasons, there could be new tools to battle not only SCN, but also sudden death syndrome. Nebraska Extension plant pathologist Loren Giesler recently joined us to explain these seed treatments.
Well, Jeff, one of the things we're seeing this year, we got a couple different things out there, and we see Syngenta's Chloriva Complete product, and that's That's a newer product with the idea being a biological to affect soybean cyst nematode. So chloriva is actually a parasitic bacteria that colonizes the soybean cyst nematode as it's emerged from its egg, going into feed. It attacks that nematode, grows on it, reproduces in it, and then produces many more of its individual units, its endospores, that can be there to attack other nematode, that nematode again. It's very specific. It's not going to affect the other nematode species out there, but it would act specifically on soybean cyst nematode. So it's interesting to see that on the marketplace, and that's going to be one that producers can use and see if we're going to see profitability from it. That's the unknown right now. But it is active, and we know it's got a great activity, but it's just a matter of if it's going to show to be profitable in these fields with cyst nematode that tend to have such aggregated populations. Is going to be a good field-wide treatment.
So is it just kind of slowing down the reproduction? Is that what it's doing?
No, actually, it's attacking that nematode and killing it. It attaches to it, insists what they say, it grows in, reproduces, gets inside, reproduces, fills its body, and kills it. So, and then it's there, and those individual units inside the nematode are there that are going to be released and go attack other ones. So in theory, it's a great concept, and we're going to see how it works out. I'm seeing mixed results. We had some trials in 2014. We didn't show a lot of gain or yield increase with it. I did see some trials out of Iowa State. They had more locations than we did. They had some good sites where they had positive returns. So I've been really just encouraging our soybean farmers, if they're looking at it, to try it, see how it responds in their operation.
Not necessarily with this specifically, but a tool like this, is that something that you'd use when we talk about soybean cyst nematode resistance?
Well, it's definitely one that, if it shows to actually reduce populations and have an effect, on a field-wide basis, that would be something that would help reduce that potential for resistance development or for that population to reproduce effectively on those sources of resistance you're growing. So I see these different tools, when we have seed treatments, this integrated management plan is so important. So if this works, on a field-wide basis, then that would be a great tool to enter into that program.
You say there's also another seed treatment that can help you with sudden death syndrome. Explain it to me.
Yeah, so sudden death syndrome we saw a lot of in 2014, and so Berger Crop Science has a product called Alivo. And Alivo is unique in that it has direct activity on the Fusarium species that causes sudden death. And this is new. In the past, we always said seed treatments didn't work for sudden death syndrome. So a lot of people are really excited about that one for those growers that have significant SDS. Again, same type of situation. It's going to be interesting to see if it's profitable on a field-wide basis with these diseases that are very aggregated or pocketed in fields. So this one, though, just a launch year for them, so not wide-scale availability, but we're going to be working with that and trying to get it out in some strips on farmers' fields to look at that profitability component, see how it works, but really the first one that we've seen that really targeting sudden death syndrome. So a couple new options. I think it's going to be a year this year that hopefully if we have conditions that could favor disease early on if we stay with cool soils, but later for these seed treatments to really show response, we need some dry conditions in August. That's where we tend to see the best gain with a seed treatment that has an effect on these.
Next week, Nathan Mueller will join us to discuss soybean inoculants. And now with this week's weather forecast, here's Nebraska Extension State Climatologist Al Dutcher.
Well, folks, here again for the weekly forecast. Of course, the big news during this last week was the very warm conditions on Monday and Tuesday. In fact, on Tuesday, numerous records set across the state as highs moved well up into the 80s, upper 80s, and into the low 90s. And in fact, a few locations had their earliest ever recorded 90-degree reading, and that dates back all the way back into the 1895 time period. Lincoln was one of those such stations that set that. Then as we got into Wednesday, we got a colder air, cloudy conditions, a little bit of drizzle, light rainfall reported in a few locations, but nothing measurable. And then of course we had the clouds sock in on Thursday across southern Nebraska that kept the temperatures down. And of course we started to see the sunshine as we got into yesterday, and very warm conditions persisted across the state. And we expect the same thing as we move through this weekend before we turn our attention to several systems moving across the region that have the potential to develop precipitation. And we need that precipitation because from the southwestern northeast Nebraska, we now have moved the drought monitor into abnormally dry conditions, a reflection of the lack of moisture the last 6 weeks, and also in combination to the lack of significant moisture that was reported during the month of September, where areas of eastern Nebraska and the Panhandle receive generous moisture. So let's see if we have any moisture in store, and the first thing I'll draw your attention to for today is that we have high pressure that's temporarily moving into our region, so very nice conditions. Everybody should be in the upper 60s to the lower 70s, except for southwest Nebraska that may make it up into the mid 70s. Now as we go into tomorrow, that system of the Pacific Northwest is expected to move toward the southeast and move into the lower Great Lakes region, and that may generate some precipitation across northeast Nebraska in the form of light rain, and then as it gets on the backside of that low, potentially snow during the overnight hours. East, central, and southeast Nebraska are going to be in the warm sector. It may actually generate some thunderstorm activity. In fact, the models are indicating that the tendency for extreme southeast Nebraska to have the highest probability of moisture, with areas of Iowa seeing more widespread rainfall. So as we get into Monday, that system now moves over to the Great Lakes region, and we turn our attention to the next storm system moving through the central Rockies that is going to start moving some energy out into the northern plains, and that may generate some widespread snowfall, with some of that actually possibly getting into northwestern portions of the state, particularly as we get into the Monday night time frame and early Tuesday morning. And if the cold air comes around, we see some snow potential for the northwest, more widespread precipitation for central and eastern Nebraska, and we may actually see, again, thunderstorm development, and as that moves to our southeast, we may actually see a little bit of light snow in the northeast part of the state. By the time we get to Wednesday, one last piece of energy starts to dive down toward the southern plains. It's not going to have any impact in terms of our precipitation. We are going to see that system drive down well into the Texas Big Bend area, and we'll be in the cool conditions. And then as we get into Friday, we still stay in the cool conditions with the moisture staying well to our south. So if we look at the temperature forecast, kind of a slow jog down as the week progresses, with some chances of moisture during the midweek period. And as we look at the 8 to 14 day period from next Thursday following Tuesday, the cool conditions stay in place. In terms of precipitation, more of a normal precipitation pattern for the Central Plains.
Thanks, Al. Today's interviews can be found on the Market Journal website and through the Market Journal mobile app. They include information on corn and soybean markets, livestock expansion bills, marketing the 2014 calf crop, and new soybean seed treatments. As always, you can follow Market Journal during the week on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Next week, Mike Briggs will analyze cattle markets, and Nathan Mueller will discuss soybean inoculants. Until then, thanks for watching. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. We'll see you next week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Corn Board and the Nebraska Soybean Board. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Corn Board and the Nebraska Soybean Board.
Soybeans are found on dinner tables around the world. Some form of the soybean is found in baby foods, snacks, cooking oils, and many other food items eaten daily. And soybeans provide the protein in the diets for livestock and fish. The Nebraska soybean farmers support research to develop new soy-based products for foods, livestock, and industrial uses through their checkoff dollars. The Nebraska Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up.